My name is Ryan Chen, and I'm an intern here at Marquette Sports Performance for 2019 fall semester. I'm also an exercise physiology major and in the Doctor of Physical Therapy program. And today I'm going to be presenting on my program for Rugby Sevens Scrum Half. And unless you're Stu, you might be saying to yourself, what the hell is a Scrum Half? I don't watch rugby. Well, this is basically what a Scrum Half does. You want to score tries, which is basically the rugby equivalent of a touchdown in football, where you have to cross the goal line and then touch the ball down, as you'll see she does right there. You have to touch the ball down across the goal line. You have to make tackles on the defensive end, and then you also have to be able to break tackles and pass. Now, Rugby Sevens is a little different from regular 15-a-side rugby, where there's only 7 players on the same size field, which requires each player to recover much greater distance of ground. Also, the halves are only 7 minutes, so often it's a lot higher intensity, a lot more sprint and anaerobic work that we're dealing with here. So moving on to a biomechanical analysis. Some of the attributes that are really important for a rugby player are power, strength, speed, RSA or repeated sprint ability, decision making, agility, both of which kind of go hand in hand. And that's because, as we see over in this clip, Scrum Half is the one that receives the ball out of the scrum, passes to an open teammate, and finds a lane to make a big run. That's a really important part of the Scrum Half's job, and so we also need to factor that in when programming for it. So some movement needs are sprinting, obviously as we've seen, cutting, being able to change direction very quickly, tackling, very high impact loads on both players, as well as breaking tackles. Again, very high impact. So an analysis of common injury risks are neck, obviously with high force tackles. We're worried about concussions, neck injuries in general, and clavicular fractures are also very common injuries in this world. And as we see up here, tackles can be very high speed, and there's a risk of head injuries. And this I know is not rugby, but with any activity where we're sprinting at high velocities, there's always risk for hamstring injuries. Also, with cutting a lot, we're going to be cautious of our ankles and make sure we're prehabbing for that. And we want to pay special emphasis on the early season, as that's where we'll have the highest risk for injuries. So for our needs, we're going to be needing some power training, resistance training for strength, sprint and acceleration training, alactic as well as aerobic conditioning, and injury prevention. So for assessing our attributes, we're going to be assessing 3 times a year, once at the beginning of the off season, end of the preseason, which would also be the beginning of the season, and then end of the season going into the off season. So our strength tests we're going to use are bench and back squat, just because those are the 2 most reliable time-tested markers of upper body and lower body strength. Power, we're going to be using clean, vertical jump, and broad jump. For speed, we're going to be using the 40-yard dash, as seen right here, as well as the 4-jump test for RSI, or reactive strength index. For agility, we're going to be using the 3-cone drill, as seen up here, as well as the shuttle run. For conditioning, we'll use the RSA test, which I'll go into a little bit more on the next slide. And finally, for mobility, we'll just use a standard FMS, functional movement screen. So for conditioning, our RSA test is going to consist of 6 30-meter sprint repeats, where we're walking or resting for 20 seconds in between. And the point of this is to get our speed decrement percentage, which will come out as a percentage, and we're going to calculate that by adding together all 6 sprint times, dividing by the best time over 6, and then subtracting by 1 to make a percentage. So basically, the more skewed your sprint times are, the more variation. That means that your performance declines more with fatigue, so we want a higher score for less declining performance with fatigue. And we're going to go about training this by undergoing speed training, sprint repeats, interval training, as well as threshold training. For strength, we're going to be using 5-3-1 structure in our strength mesocycles. And our core lifts are going to be structured around front squat, trap bar deadlift, safety bar split squat, bench press, military press, and bent over row. Obviously with variations, progressions based on where we are in the season. And we're going to offset these days from days we have conditioning. So if we have conditioning for RSA, we're not going to be doing that on the same day as lifts. And our frequency is going to vary based on where we are in the season and can be from anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week. For power, we're also going to be using the 5-3-1 structure, except with a very high emphasis on velocity, and our core lifts are going to be some very common power exercises such as clean and hang clean, jump squat, snatch, and sled pushes. So these are also going to be performed with the lifts of our strength exercises and paired or superset with plyometrics. Again, depending on where we are in the season, the frequency will vary, but it'll mostly be 2 or 3 times a week. For speed, we are training 2 distinct but not quite separate attributes in top speed and acceleration. For top speed, we can use a lot of the same things as acceleration, like sprint repeats, plyometrics, and strength training will help with all of these. But over speed training, where we're setting a treadmill for a little bit higher than a player's current top speed, letting them adapt to that, and then bail out with the railings. And resisted sprint training would be more specific towards acceleration in that respect too. So for agility, as I mentioned before, we want to make sure that there is a reaction component with decision making, because as I said before, scrum half position, you really need to be able to make good decisions, pass the ball to the right player. So having a reactive component in our agility training is very important. We're going to go about training agility with agility drills, balance exercises, single leg exercises, and we're also going to work on ankle and knee strength, just so that we're preventing from injuries throughout this training and in-game. So now I'm going to move on a little bit, talking about periodization. So for my first mesocycle, it's the off season, and here you can see we're very heavy on hypertrophy. Obviously, we're going to test the first week, get a baseline for where our athletes are at, but then we're going to work on hypertrophy and we see hamstring prevention, ankle prevention, shoulder mobility, a lot of early season injury work to make sure that we're taking care of our athletes and so that they're stronger when they have the highest chance of being injured. And then if you see these numbers next to like plyo or sprint, that's just based on the progressions that I have, and I'll bring those up in a couple slides. So for the preseason, our first block is also going to be hypertrophy, but then our second block is going to have more focus on sprint speed and power, both kind of working in conjunction because power also plays a role in sprint speed. And then at the end of the preseason, we're also going to be testing. Over here on the left, you'll see we start the preseason off, and then we're increasing our volume a little bit, but then gradually we're going down. And you'll see that also with the in-season volume. So over here, we've got very heavy power block to start the season. Then we're moving into conditioning as we want to be able to have our players push harder later in the games, later in the season when it's more trying for fitness. And then finally, our last 2 blocks are an agility block and a sprint speed and plyometrics block. I didn't mention before, but as you'll notice, I have an offload week every single cycle or month, except for the last month where we have 2. And then here we have all the progressions I have on my program. So for instance, you'll see here I've got plyo 6. What's plyo 6? Well, that's single leg top jump repeats, raptor single leg kneel to broad jump, and then single leg quick box jumps. And I just wanted to put it all in one place rather than just spell it out here, just because I feel like that'd be a little more concise and just easier to follow, because we can see here We have raptor tuck jump repeats, and then the next time we're progressing to single leg tuck jump repeats. So I really wanted to make sure there's continuity with my progressions and just really making sure that everything flows together within the course of the season. So now that you guys understand a little bit of my methodology for this program, you can kind of see where we can take these players and help them improve. And thank you guys for watching. Any questions?
Good, yeah. Any questions in the room or online? Russell, go ahead.
I've got one question. You mentioned earlier about the exercise testing or like the assessments you do. Would you have any plans to increase the frequency of testing just to get like a better graph of what their numbers look like throughout the season, or are you like focused on like the 3 times a year?
I was kind of anticipating this as being like a program specifically for the scrum half position, but also the scrum half would be practicing within the scope of the team. So I figured with a team setting, it would be hard to test a little too much. So I just figured 3 times a year would be ideal, just to get baselines of where are we at in the off season, where are we at going into the season, and then where did we end of the season, and then from there I would just plan for the next season.
Cool, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, you mentioned at the start when you're kind of laying out your program that you would incorporate mobility in there as well. Can you give some examples about what mobility you think might be important, or what joints would be important to be mobile in, for the scrum half role or whatever?
Yeah, so I definitely think shoulder mobility would be huge. First of all, because they're taking tackles, a lot of the time you're leading with your shoulder, or if you're getting tackled, your shoulder can be the first thing into the ground. So being mobile and strong in your shoulder would be very important, especially for a scrum half, as well as they have to be able to pass, and a lot of time that's underhand. So I wouldn't really be worried about overhead exercises, but definitely making sure that our shoulder joints are strong and mobile.
And then another question from Emily online. She says, how are you addressing maintaining both strength and fitness simultaneously in the in-season? If you could kind of expand on that, because you had it up on the screen, but if you could expand on how you address them simultaneously, the strength aspect and fitness.
Yeah, so for my in-season, I've got, obviously, I like to keep strength very consistent. It doesn't really ever go under 2 sessions a week. And that's kind of, obviously this block, you're looking to improve power and strength, but the other blocks you're more looking at maintaining. And then for aerobic and alactic training, we've got just like regular cardio at like regular intervals, and then also interval work also coinciding with that.
Any other questions? No? All right, good job. Well.